onto the ground, in local experiences, people coming in from other universities and from, I guess, a group that has been sort of trying something of an umbrella group for some of these issues. And I think what we'll do, just rather than the formal sort of I introduce people and then I turn it, Michelle is going to be our moderator for this session, Michelle Corbin. And I guess you can start with the introductions of yourself and then the subject of the panel. So I'll turn it over to Michelle. And those of you who do want to speak, we do have 2 microphones now. So we can hopefully pass these around when you have a question or so on. Just raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. Okay.
Hi, my name is Michelle Corbin, and I'm an associate professor at Little State College in Massachusetts, Worcester State University. I'm in sociology and also affiliate faculty of women's studies and also of ethnic studies. So I guess we'll start with introductions. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm also active in my union and have turned in recent years, because of my experiences working at an increasingly defunded state college that is largely serving Black, brown, and working class students, have turned much of my sort of scholarship and activism towards, as our panelists described, the sort of politics of higher education, which is what has brought me into collaboration with the center here at Stony Brook.
Hi, I'm Roschelle. I'm a professor of sociology, and I'm the chair of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, and I'm also an affiliate with Latin American Caribbean Studies at SUNY-New Paltz. I went to all public schools my whole life and got my degrees at SUNY Albany, University of Maryland, and so I'm very excited to be here. My sort of research and teaching is all on race, class, and gender, racial ethnic families, poverty, issues like that. I've been an activist, I think, I would say since 1982, when I helped get the University of Maryland to divest from South Africa. I worked a lot on environmental stuff back then, pro-choice, which we now call reproductive rights, and a variety of other issues. I was the vice president of our union, UUP, for academics for 3 years. And this past year, in the spring, a bunch of us got frustrated with the time it was taking for the contract to happen. And we just felt like we needed to try to push the governor and to be more activist than what we felt like we could maybe do in the context of UUP. So we started a group called Radical University Professionals. One of the things about New Paltz that we're really conscientious about is including adjuncts, lecturers, contingent faculty in our organizing. And in fact, about 5 years ago, we got the university to increase adjunct salaries to $3,000, which is still pathetic, but it was like 2. And so I think in some ways that gives us more sort of solidarity and power, because everybody knows that, that they're involved in it together.
Hi, I'm Jarrod Stranahan. I'm a criminologist, completing my doctoral studies at the CUNY Graduate Center. I am a member of a group called CUNY Struggle, which is a rank and file organization, and I'll say a little bit about that in the discussion. Our principal organizing project right now is the campaign for 7K or strike on the CUNY system. And I too attended public universities and public school for my entire life, except for 2 years that I will never forget because I will always be paying for them.
Hi, my name is Mcleer, and I came up from Washington, D.C. today. I'm here sort of wearing 2 hats. I'm part of the organizing that SEIU did is starting in Washington, D.C. and moving into now. I was at George Washington University as a part-time faculty member in 2002, and we were the first group of part-time faculty at a private institution to organize with SEIU. And it's since been growing. And they were talking a little, Mike and Steve talked a little about it in their book, which made me very happy. And I'm also, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in SEIU and some stuff we're doing nationally, because I was really happy to be invited by Christopher and Michelle, and I think that with the unions, different unions, we need to be talking to each other all the time, and coordinating and sharing ideas. So I've learned a lot here today, and I'll show you some things that we're doing. And the other hat I'm wearing, I'm the treasurer of the only national advocacy organization for contingent faculty, New Faculty Majority. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our New Faculty Majority policy agenda and what we've been doing to bring the unions together on various issues.
Good. My name is Tony Vandermeer. I'm here from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. I teach in Africana Studies Department. I am originally from Harlem, New York. Went to school in Yonkers High School, and then found myself going up to Boston, and I haven't returned. But anyway, I've worked with Save UMB, and we could talk more about that as we get into the mix of things.
Thank you. So to kind of open things up and just make the origins of this panel a little more clear, I think, as Chris mentioned, we met at the Working Class Studies Association meeting, which was hosted at Stony Brook, and it's a small academic association that emerged out of creating space for working class academics who came out of the working class. You come into the professoriate and you have this disorienting experience of neither being able to go home nor truly really fitting in. But was struck by how that organization wasn't necessarily prioritizing what's facing academics actually in our work and in our working conditions. And if you come from working class backgrounds, you're overrepresented in adjunctification and in struggling schools. And so there was a conversation about, well, how do we turn that conversation, not just like in our scholarship looking out, but into the institutions in which we work. So one of the things we were talking about was starting a caucus of working faculty within the Working Class Studies Association, but also just fostering a broader conversation about what's going on for faculty members and in public higher education more broadly. For myself, I'm also a member of a reform caucus. I'm a member of the Educators for a Democratic Union in the state of Massachusetts. That organization has both K through 12 and higher ed, and we managed to take the leadership now for 3 terms running of one of the largest teachers unions in the country. And I have been really struck by the power of rank and file organizing, democratic organizing, bottom-up organizing, where we understand that our power is in our members and not in politicians. But I've been participating in K through 12 unions, and they've been doing a lot of organizing across the country. I mean, even before West Virginia, you have these reform caucuses in the teachers' unions that are growing all across the country. A couple weeks ago, I went to an event that brought together all of these radical caucuses across the country, in part sponsored by Labor Notes, an old labor organization. But I said, in higher ed, I feel like we need to bring together our conversations. So at Working Class Studies Association, there was someone from Eastern Michigan University who basically told the same story that's on my campus. I'd met someone from Wisconsin who told the same story on my campus. I went to Left Forum and met Jarrod and heard about CUNY struggle, and they told the same story on their campus. And yet we're all like in our little silos, and I think that we could really benefit from beginning to grow a more national level set of connections so that we understand the broader context of our struggles, and we can begin to learn from each other about how we can build a stronger movement to really save higher education, which I personally think is in a grave existential crisis. So this panel emerged out of our desire, right? Let's start with the kind of macro level theoretical analysis and then move towards, no, but what are people doing on the ground? And so wanting to bring together people from across higher education who were part of reform caucuses or other organizing efforts within unions and outside of unions. And as a feminist sociologist, also coming from women's studies and ethnic studies, wanting to make sure that we build explicitly that connection, that these austerity politics are racialized and gendered, and particularly target communities of color, whether that's our faculty or our students or our area studies like women's studies, Africana studies. And so wanting to bring those of us doing organizing work together to kind of have a conversation about how folks are responding on the ground. So I thought we'd start by asking each of our panelists who have been involved in different aspects of organizing to share a little bit with us about their organizations and what they've been doing. And then we have some questions that we'll kind of walk through to kind of unpack some more of their work. And since you're wearing two hats, Anne, maybe we'll go ahead and start with Anne.
I brought some visuals.
Okay, perfect, yeah.
It helps. Oh, here.
Microphone.
Take a mic with you. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. You can help it.
I like visuals, but it also helps me remember what I was going to say. All right. I didn't want to freak Michelle out by telling her how many slides I have, but I'm super good at going through these things fast. Wait, no, how do I do this? Start slideshow. Okay.
You got it?
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about some new models of organizing, activism, and resistance in the part of the higher education faculty movement that I've been involved in, for the express purpose of what Michelle just said, of building alliances and strengthening all of us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Local 500, SEIU Local 500, some stuff that SEIU is doing nationally, our Maryland campaign. I'm going to talk a little bit about new faculty majority, and then some other interesting ideas, which I'm trying to bring around the world, to bring around the country to share, that I think we can all learn from. So SEIU Local 500, we represent mostly adjuncts, some graduate students, some contingent full-time faculty in these 10 institutions. And I like to take their little stamps and put them on that page and say, look what we've done, right? I'm very proud of this. We have improved their adjunct faculty working conditions, I would say substantially, though we're not where we want to be yet, right, which is equity. Our members want both pay equity with full-time faculty, but also job equity, right? So we have, so these are the working conditions. You know this whole thing: low pay, no support for research or scholarship, lack of inclusion. Steve called the sweating, right, of academic labor. Adjuncts have been called piece workers, etc. Rhodes scholars, right? There's lots of things. I am proud to say that we have improved salaries in our contracts. We have professional development funds, so the adjunct that wants to write a book, the professor that was here earlier was asking that question, now can get, or go to a conference, can get money from the fund that the union has negotiated. We've improved, almost all our contracts have some language about how the adjunct faculty have to be included in the academic community, right? So largely, we have two public institutions. Most of our institutions are private, where the tenured faculty don't have collective bargaining rights. So the adjuncts are kind of like they're on their own in their union. So we're negotiating with the administration for inclusion into a lot of structures, as opposed to having in your unions, the adjuncts sort of trying to negotiate into inclusion in structure through the union. Does that make sense? We've had little things: access to the office photocopier, better office space, expenses for field trips, all this kind of thing. We have labor management committees on every single campus where the adjuncts sit down with the administration and talk about things above and beyond collective bargaining. Such as inclusion, for example, or such as, can we get some of the good practices in some departments applied across the board? And that's so there's sort of two paths, right? There's labor management, there's collective bargaining, and they kind of go along side by side. So we've been pretty successful on each institution as they stand. So Steve and Mike talked a little bit about this in their book, and he spoke a little bit about our initial idea of having a metro strategy. So there's sort of two aspects. One was can you link together the faculty in each of the institutions that are often just a couple of miles from each other, right? And people teach in different institutions, right? Could we have a contract that maybe covered everybody with standards, but had different sort of, our members call this a hybrid contract. So I teach Georgetown, there's certain things I want in my contract that might be different to I teach at GW. But perhaps we have in the contract that our pay is reflective of, proportional to full-timers or whatever. We're not there yet. Could we have a database where the union administers, you have your curriculum, your CV, you give it to the union, and when the chair of sociology at one university needs somebody at the last minute, they have access to the union members' CVs to facilitate getting more work, right? That's something we're trying to work on. Trying to work on some sort of sharing of resources from professional development. We've got some initial talks going with the president of the Consortium of Universities in DC on how we could get the universities to pool resources for professional development. From my point of view, adjunct faculty should be paid for professional development, so that would be part of the collective bargaining aspect, right? Could we have a healthcare pool for the adjuncts that don't have access to healthcare? These are great ideas that we have. What Mike pointed out today is we also want to bring in other workers and sort of everybody, right, in the university. So we do have coalitions on campuses with students. We have this at George Washington University and AU, where the students, the other unions on campus, we're building it a little bit at Howard University. Say the AAUP chapter, the full-timers, come together to address on-campus issues. And we would like to sort of build that vertically in each campus and then connect it horizontally across the city. It's a lot of work, and some of our challenges are that, to be totally honest, the institutions in Washington, D.C. are not competing for adjunct faculty, right? Because there's a large labor pool of very talented people they can pull from, plus they keep farming out people with PhDs, I'm an example of one, right? Into a market where there's no full-time jobs, right? So they control the supply, the supply and demand of labor in their own industry, right? So there's some of our challenges, plus the turnover of adjuncts is very large. We have 200 or 300 people in some of our big institutions every semester are new, right? So that's an ongoing organizing challenge. But just to look at nationally a little bit, so SEIU has apparently organized 24,000 faculty, graduate student employees, and non-instructional staff on 60 campuses since 2013. Mostly private campuses, but some public. So they've been doing this, big national organizing campaign on campuses. Yes. There was 20, I'm proud of this, 20 new collective bargaining units at private colleges in 2016 through SEIU's, we initially called it Adjunct Action, now it's called Faculty Forward campaign. So a lot of organizing is going on. And so the organizing has been going on in this moment where we've been under so much attack, right? So our local union also represents a 10,000 member public service. It's the Montgomery County Public Schools service employees. We've lost agency fee from that group, which has really affected our higher ed section, which is growing but smaller. So in this kind of, atmosphere where we're being attacked, we're essentially everywhere. We're organizing, but we're looking at new models of organizing, right? So I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on in Maryland. In Maryland, there is no collective bargaining for public sector faculty, right? So the University of Maryland, where Annie went to college, the community colleges in Maryland do not have collective bargaining rights as a whole. Our union represents the part-time faculty of Montgomery College, which got its own little local ordinance, local collective bargaining many years ago. The AAUP represent the full-timers. We've been trying to pass legislation in Annapolis that would get collective bargaining for the community colleges faculty and staff for 5 years in a so-called democratic state, right? And every year we bring our legislation, and every year it's like, oh yes, you'll get it passed, and it gets blocked by Democrats. And I can talk about that privately with you later. So we've decided to change tack, right? We've decided that we're not broad enough. We need a broad political base. This is kind of what they were talking about today, right? So we're now launching this campaign. I have this flyer actually to hand out to you, where our campaign demands, you can't really see them there, are collective bargaining, $15 an hour minimum wage for all campus workers, student debt relief, free college in whatever form that ends up being, and that's it, right? Anyway, it's on the flyer. So it's we're broadening the issues, we're broadening the coalition. So now we can go to campus and organize students, parents, all the faculty, all the staff together on these issues. And bring it to Annapolis, and our legislative demand, along with the minimum wage and the debt relief and the free college, will be collective bargaining for all public employees in Maryland that don't have it. Because we might as well go big, because going small got us nowhere, right? Okay. That's Maryland. I wanted to talk a little bit about this coalition at Duke University grad students. So to jump back to the private institutions, graduate student unions up till recently the majority of them were in the public sector. There's been some, as you've seen around the country, organizing now in private institutions. Duke University, they do not have collective bargaining, right? In fact, they lost their union election, I believe. So they decided they're going to do an entirely different model of organizing. They have organized a voluntary membership basis for their union at Duke University, and they're working with a bunch of allies on campus for a broad set of demands. Again, right, $15 an hour minimum wage, but also, and I put this on here, and I can send it to you guys if you like, just transparency, need-blind admissions, renaming buildings, create community space for students with disabilities, ban medically unnecessary surgery on intersex infants, taking action on hate crimes. What else have we got? Changing the curriculum and banning the box. I mean, it is a broad range of demands. I think this is super exciting, right? So instead of just going, we're grad students and we're addressing our working conditions, yes, but we're also connecting with all these other groups with which we intersect, right? And we can't leave people behind, right? I think what we learned this morning is you have to, if you're not including everybody, you're leaving somebody behind, then you're damaging yourself, right? Unless you just want a small group of people to be successful. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I thought that was great. So Florida, they're doing something the same, no collective bargaining. Florida, this is a group of faculty pushing for college for all, quality higher education. Mike mentioned that earlier. They did a bus tour of Florida. They're mobilizing to challenge the status quo of poor working conditions, student debt, and limited access to higher education. They're holding politicians accountable across the state with town halls, intersecting with the Poor People's Campaign, the governor's race, all that stuff. So broad and, but intersected, right? Okay, so now I'm going to come a little bit to talk about my other hat, new faculty majority. So the part of the increase in contingent faculty unionization that has been happening in the private sector is some of the kudos goes to new faculty majority, this group's Coalition for the Academic Workforce. Anyway, because it's a national group joining, Chris is giving me the thing, trying to join together the work of all the unions. I have on here policy, some of our policy agenda. I can send it to you guys. These are reports, etc. Okay, a couple of other things I want to mention. Bargaining for the common good, has anybody heard of that? Yeah, this I think is huge. Wonderful principles about connecting with coalitions and community partners and using collective bargaining to bargain over issues that are not directly related to working conditions, right? Just employment campaigns. There's students at GW just put demands in. It's kind of like a workers' rights petition. There's one campus on the country that has a just employment policy, which is Georgetown University, where all the workers get a living wage. And finally, these guys, on Coke My Campus, have you heard of them? Yeah. So we worked with some of the students at George Mason on this, and I think that addresses also some of the issues that Mike and Steve were bringing up. So I just wanted to show you those things to help open up the conversation.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's okay. You had two hats to cover. So actually, I want to transition next to Tony, since Tony wins the award for coming the furthest away. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about Save UMB and why you need to save UMB, and sort of a little bit about your organization to kind of frame the efforts that you're bringing to the table.
So, Save UMB developed as a result of cutbacks to the campus. So the university had cut, started cutting department budgets. I think it was like 10%. And then they started to lay off faculty, adjunct faculty, and then staff and so forth. They were raising the fees for parking. And so it was a coalition of the various unions. Now, I'm part of the faculty union, and I have to admit that our faculty union has poor leadership. But it's been the staff union that has really been instrumental in being the ground forces of trying to keep the union together and organizing grad students as well, and some of the other unions. And so one of the things is the university has been trying to rebuild itself and building, doing new buildings and so forth. And so for some reason, money got spent at places that, weren't producing results quickly, but, it created issues for the campus and the budget, and so they start using the scissors and start cutting and throwing people out the window, not literally, but, throwing people out the window, and, right? But let me give you sort of a backdrop, because, you start to talk about the question of working class, and that's like missing, in a lot of the work we do in the academy. And a lot of times, and even some of the union work we do, it's very top-down, sort of corporate unionism. It's not, sort of bottom-up. And, like, for example, I know, like Duke, it's a right-to-work state, based on, with the result of segregation and so forth. And I know, for example, there was a group called Black Workers for Justice that, it was organizing, they organized a union, actually, throughout North Carolina and Virginia, and were instrumental in organizing, at Duke, and trying to work with faculty and working with grad students. But you don't hear that, the role that these, working class black workers, how instrumental they were in trying to deal with some of this. So part of, our union, the faculty union, has been based on negotiated contract, blah, 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 blah. So Massachusetts had a black governor when we had a black president. It had a black chancellor. It had a black provost, right? But basically, I guess like I said, we still was getting our ass kicked. So, but part of it was to really understand the idea for the need to sort of, particularly for the university, to give a public image that look a little different, that sort of look at what they were trying to promote around the question of diversity. And it was, in some ways, it was false. So the chancellor was the sacrificial lamb around the budget crisis. And it created a big to-do in the community because it was very well respected. And essentially it was that he was, actually I went to college with the chancellor. We lived in the same dorm. We played basketball, I played football. At one point we liked the same young lady and all that kind of stuff. But it's a very tall, he's a really huggy kind of guy, and the chancellor's role is a smile and wave guy, and could you leave a check at the table, right? But, of course, the provost runs things and so forth. But then the way UMass is structured is there's a 5 college, 5 universities, and you have a president that, is head of all of those universities. And so Marty Meehan, who used to be a congressional representative, became president. And so Marty didn't really like this tall black guy, who went over him and taking up the spotlight. He's very charismatic. And so they created an issue around the budget and said there were some issues, and they got rid of him and so forth. And the provost fell and so forth. And so the whole composition changed. But during that time, in the Africana Studies Department, there were 2 black females who were up for tenure who didn't get it. And so what the university did is that they blamed our department who approved their tenure and created this like kind of gender issue in our department when they refused to give these black females tenure. A study also came out about how black women on the campus, women of color on the campus are usually relegated to service, and so forth, and how they don't really track in terms of dealing with tenure, and the question of diversity, it was really challenged, and so forth. So, but our department, Africana Studies, was under attack. Our union did not support us. The general union group of folks did not support us because they believed the distortion around the gender question. They didn't want to. Well, that was one of the things that they said. And so the question around dealing with gender, class, and race, got a little mucky, and then you find that we didn't get much support. But what we did do is that we organized, and that we organized students, and we organized in our community, and we organized allies throughout the university. And so we're able to get what we wanted to, they put us in receivership. We just got a receivership. We had hired 2 lines. They promised us 4. We got 2, actually 3.5, but they still owe us 2 more as a result. But it was because we took a different route than the union was taking. And we challenged the union, in fact. We have what is called the CDU, which is the Caucus for Democratic Union, which is, I call it a government in exile to take over the leadership of whoever the current president is and so forth, to sort of challenge that. So the question of what has the impact of privatization been in the city of Boston. For example, Northeastern is one of the major drivers. But you find that UMass has been moving to a point of becoming more and more privatized. And so the state used to add almost 70% of our budget. Now it's like, I think, maybe 30%, that they add to it. And so now they're building all these buildings, and they're building dorms. They figure how to finance that so that after 30 years, they start falling apart, they'll give it back to us, but they're getting all the money from that process through public money. And so the question becomes, what is the role of a public institution, particularly to the public, and what is the urban mission, and so forth. And so these have been issues that a core of radical faculty who've been only pushing the union with the broader community and try to make links outside of that community so that you can lean on the legislature, because a lot of people would like to go to the board meetings and make noise and shout them down, but the board just get pissed and nothing really gets done, versus going to key and strategic people in the legislature, Ways and Means, in the House and in the Senate, and shaking it down, but particularly in areas like in Boston, which is very strategic. For example, in Boston, we had 4 women of color who were involved in the political process successfully. One was running for Congress, Ayanna Presley. One is for the district attorney, which is also key. And 2 were state legislators. One of them took out the current Ways and Means chairperson, right? And so, but Boston has a lot of power to be able to influence folks and make sure that those resources are coming back. So the short point is this, is that if you cannot create consequences for people who should be accountable to do what they do, then you're not going to get anything. And so you have to make sure that you put the pressure on them and even the leadership of those institutions and say, we're going to keep you accountable and we will do everything to make it uncomfortable for you in order to get what you want.
Great, thank you very much from sharing with us from how these are influencing Boston. And so next, I'm going to give it back to Jarrod, who is going to tell us a little bit more from a graduate student perspective, because we thought it was important to have kind of multiple layers of folks differently situated in the university. So if you can tell us a little bit about CUNY struggle and the situation that brings you to the table.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I'm glad to speak after Tony because CUNY is in very ways similar to UMass. UMass Boston specifically. I went to UMass. I got my bachelor's degree there. Boston. Yeah, the best one. And actually, the Hunter College at CUNY it's basically like you picked up all the different old UMass buildings and just dropped them in the middle of Midtown. It's the architecture and everything. It's uncanny. And so in the CUNY system, we actually have a similar problem with our union that you described. Amid decades of austerity in the CUNY system that Michael and Stephen spoke so eloquently about, our union, the Professional Staff Congress, has adopted what could be charitably called conciliatory in the face of one austerity contract after another. And when you talk about the different ways that austerity is imposed on the public university, adjunctification is, for us, the primary means that CUNY is being degraded, not just for its faculty, but also for its students. And our group, CUNY Struggle, is a rank-and-file organization. It's composed mostly of adjuncts and graduate students, and we organize simultaneously within our official union structure and also outside of it. Now, why did we come to this organizational model? It's a model that dates back at least to the early decades of the 20th century, and it emerged as a response to the bureaucratization of labor unions and the creation of a leadership strata in labor unions whose conception of political power, as Michael emphasized over and over again when he was saying, oh, political power, their conception of political power is sitting down behind closed doors with politicians and cutting deals. Now, it would be bad enough, from a leftist perspective, it would be bad enough if they did that and it worked. But then we could say, okay, Michael, well, at least you got us a good contract, so it's fine. The problem is it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked for decades. And CUNY has dealt one austerity contract after another, and they have done so on the backs of CUNY's adjuncts. Now, raise your hand if you support a flat tax. Right? Somebody just sneered, for those of you listening. Well, the Professional Staff Congress, CUNY's union, doles out its contractual raises on a flat percentage basis. So our last contract, won after 7 years without one, was cumulative, something like 10.5%. Now, if you make $200,000 a year, you got 10.5% of that. That's great. You know, put a down payment on a house upstate. You know, put your kid through college. Yeah. Now, if you are a full-time CUNY adjunct, you got 10% of that. And the sad part is the contract, despite the fact that it did not keep pace with inflation and was an austerity contract, it was passed overwhelmingly. And I was a part of the Vote No campaign, and the Vote Yes campaign, spearheaded by leadership, including Michael and others, their message amounted to vote yes and you get your back pay. How could we compete with that, right? So our group has been confronted with fighting against the tremendous inertia of what is obviously a fiscal crisis, a political crisis in New York City, but above all, a crisis of imagination in how austerity is combated in the public university. And we found our attempts to work through the official apparatuses of the union to be prefigured and defeated 3 steps ahead at every possible juncture. No matter what you do, they're waiting for you, and they're going to slam the door in your face. I don't know if anybody here studies political science, but it's very much a classic political machine. In order to ascend even to the position of chapter chair, you have to be selected by somebody in central leadership. And if somebody who isn't selected runs, they'll run someone against you. And every once in a while they screw up and some leftist gets on the delegate assembly and gets to give barnstorming speeches denouncing all the class traitors, and it's entertaining, but it's the exception. So anyway, I'll wrap up with the introduction in a second, but suffice it to say, we feel that, to use a cliche, desperate times call for desperate measures. And we don't see the strategy of our union, which is run by and for affluent full-time faculty. We don't see that strategy reflecting at all the seriousness of the situation we find ourselves in, especially those of us struggling to keep the lights on and to stay ahead on rent, to say nothing of actually doing research and all these other wonderful things that all academics should be able to do. And so we spearheaded a campaign based out of the Vote No campaign for the last contract. It's called 7K or Strike. The 7K being the proposed minimum wage per course for CUNY faculty that we are demanding. Presently, they make around $3,300. Now, imagine New York City trying to support yourself. Even the full-time faculty, some of the younger full-time faculty have a hard time and have to live with roommates, and we're not saying it's great for them. Just imagine trying to live off of that. And so we say 7K or strike. We have a big union. There's a lot of big talkers. We have a lot of people who write great books about austerity. They clearly understand it, and it's time to apply that. I'm being really serious. It's time to apply that. And we want to talk about political power. What's the number one source of political leverage that a union has? Is it going behind closed doors with the governor? No, it's going on strike. In fact, if you don't go on strike, are you even really a union? And so that's the basis of our campaign. I can talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of it as the discussion unfolds, but I'll probably shut up for the time being.
Wow, this is so fascinating. I'm so excited to meet all these people and hear everybody's different stories. So I'm at SUNY-New Paltz. I was involved in UUP for about 3 years. I was the vice president and was very frustrated for, I think, similar things. And I actually am a senior faculty member. I've been at New Paltz almost 20 years, and I had a job for 5 years before that. So I am sort of now, I'm not the old guard, but I'm definitely been there a while. And it was so frustrating because it was the same old people that were retired, that were still coming to union meetings and wouldn't shut up and wouldn't give the young people a voice. And after a couple of years of that, I just couldn't take it anymore. And so I strategically got a really amazing activist friend of mine to run for vice president. We do have a good president now, Beth, some of you know. She's really been organizing the union for the last several years in knowing that what was going to happen at the Supreme Court. And when I became vice president, there was this effort to bring in the younger faculty. The one thing we are really good at New Paltz is fighting for adjuncts and lecturers, because it just was a thing that our former president was into. And we sometimes, the full-time people were like, what about us? All you ever do is talk about adjuncts. So everybody has their self-interest. But anyway, so it was getting frustrating. I decided not to stay, to rerun. And then this year, in the spring, everybody was just getting really frustrated, waiting for the contract, and we decided we needed to push Governor Cuomo to give us a better deal than what he was offering at the time. And so one of the things we did was we started this group, Radical University Professionals. We invited adjuncts, we invited professional staff, because people who work in different professional capacities are part of our union, faculty. And we started organizing. And the first thing we did was we started organizing protests. And because I'm a tenured faculty member, I am willing to, and also I'm totally not afraid, I've never been afraid, even before I was tenured, to speak my mind. I'm from Long Island originally. And so I was kind of, me and another colleague, we were sort of the public face to deal with the president, to deal with the media. So when we decided to start having protests on campus, we collaboratively wrote a letter, and I sent it to the president to protect them, to let him know that it wasn't about him, that it was about the governor and the contract. And that was a really smart political move, because after that, he totally supported all of the activities that we were involved in trying to get a better contract. So we had, and we organized with students. We invited the socialist student group, we invited New York Rising, we invited the Black Student Union, the Latinx Student Union, a bunch of different student groups to get involved. And we've also been organizing heavily on our campus for the tuition freeze, both students and faculty. So we already had that really good sort of coalition. And then we invited Cynthia Nixon to come and give a talk. Now, we weren't allowed to have her on campus. There's a park that's like, 100 yards from the campus. And we made sure that we had a lot of media attention. And apparently the governor was not happy about that, which was good, right? And so we were really organizing around that. And then once we got the contract, which similar to you, right? Some of it's really bad, some of it's better. It's good for me because I make more money, so that 6% raise is going to help me. But one of the things we talked about is, what do we do now? How do we keep the momentum going? What are the things that we want to fight for? And so people kept meeting over the summer. And one of the things that we've done, and this goes to speak to what you were saying, is that people are working really hard on political campaigns. So we have a few very contested races in our district. Anthony Delgado, we have Jen Metzger, right? There's a whole bunch of people, and so people are campaigning. And at the beginning, I mean, Delgado was way down. They are neck and neck. So it's been really interesting to watch. And then also those independent Democrats all got thrown out of office, which is great in the primaries. And so all of the people, I mean, if the people that beat them don't win, we're screwed. But part of our thing is we need to get into the legislature, because that is the power in New York State, right? And so we've been doing a lot of that kind of organizing. The other thing is that we have also been really pushing the college, because we do have a president that is, he does believe deep in his heart that he's committed to diversity and inclusion, and in some ways he is, but he hasn't put his money where his mouth is, and we need to hire way more faculty of color. We have a lot of Latinx students now. In fact, we're really getting close to being one of those Hispanic serving institutions, and we're all really pushing for that. The president's like, well, it has ramifications. Basically, they have to hire more Latino professors, which we're in favor of. So there's all these different coalitions. It's not a bunch of white people. It's not a bunch of old white men. It's not just white women. It's a really good mix of the cross-section of our campus. And also there's a recognition. There's some people who've been activists for a long time that, white women dominate in feminist organizations, historically women of color, men dominate women in leftist organizations. And when we start seeing that happen, we say something. So there's a guy who was never an activist, suddenly he's all involved, and I had to pull him aside one time and sort of explain to him, because he doesn't know anything about, this stuff. And he's a friend of mine, so I was able to, but it was like, dude, you need to back off a little and listen. And so I think that building coalitions across groups is really hard, but it's definitely not impossible. And in this moment, people are so freaked out and panicked and worried about democracy that it's actually a really good time. And I really did like their idea about bringing in the Dreamers. We've done a lot of work with that on our campus. We've also been doing a lot of work in the community with immigration issues up there. And so all of these groups together now, I think we're going to really start to, in the next phase, to sort of see, okay, what are the ways that we can organize around this to make education accessible for everybody in our community.
Thank you. I want to, you raised an issue that was in our questions that I wanted to just kind of pause for a moment on and see if any of our other panelists wanted to add to, which is, we've talked a little bit about working across divisions like graduate student, full-time, adjunct, but as a feminist, anti-racist sociologist thinking about the intersections of race, class, and gender, I think your point about how we grapple with race and class and gender and sexuality within our organizing, whether that's, for example, I know about the UMass Boston situation where they are framed as the diversity flagship. So you have UMass Amherst, which is the flagship, and then you have UMass Boston, which is the only public university in the city of Boston surrounded by Harvard and MIT. So to undermine the only public institution in UMass Boston, the diversity flagship, has some serious racial and class-based politics. So whether that's how we focus our work explicitly on that. I know when I met Anne it was at the National Women's Studies Association, and part of what I was struck by in the work of New Faculty Majority was the work you were doing about women and contingency, about how women are overrepresented in adjuncts. And so if, or in my own experience, same thing, working in our unions, they tend to be white male dominated, right? Women and faculty of color who try to get involved are often disciplined and spoken over and mansplained to, and it creates these fractions within our ability to organize. So I was just curious if anybody had anything to add around, in your work, how are you grappling with these divisions of race and class and gender and prioritizing issues of anti-racism and this environment of increasing misogyny and male domination of the very organizations, I mean, whether that's full professors versus adjuncts or within union leadership. So I just wanted to pause for a moment and really amplify that question and see if anybody else wanted to add to how that has shown up in your work.
Well, it's like you have to create, it starts to get uncomfortable because you have to challenge people, but you have to try to do it in a way that it can change things, that it doesn't further polarize things. And I think that for like diversity is just the catch word, but the truth of the matter is that, so you have senior faculty, well, tenured faculty members, who's present themselves as being the radical feminists and this and, and so forth. And the truth of the matter is that they have no real analysis about what's going on and how it relates to the community and how to bring, forces in. And so they'll do things, but the results is, it's not there. And so I know for us, we've had to call people out and really challenge them. And what it does in some ways is that it, it's like you want to avoid the elephant in the room, but you still want to do that so there could be growth. I mean, so we got to, and I think it's something we have to figure out. How do you deal with contradictions? How do you expose them, and how do you ways to mend things so people can move forward? So there's a group that do things around decolonization and so forth. And our department has been on the front lines. And so you would think that they would say, well, how could we work with you all to do so and so? But they want to go and lead and do it, and it's, it's like spitting in the wind, in terms of what they're doing. So, but I think, for example, I'm on the board of CIT, which is the Center for Innovation and Teaching. And so they wanted to have a forum on gender, sort of in class, sort of race. And I said, well, we need to do something about white supremacy. But they wanted to separate. I said, no, let's bring them together. Let's not isolate it. Let's have a broad intersectional piece, and let's put it on the table, and so forth. But that got tense, around that, because it became like a gender issue, in the room. And I think it was more a power issue than a race issue. Not to say, and I'm sure there were some gender factors in there, but people see what they want to see. And we have to create the basis for people to be more self-reflective and self-critical, but not always, like you're the race, you're creating the race issue, you're creating the gender, so wait a minute, let's back up and let's try to figure out another way to figure out how do we achieve equity here, and what does that look like, and what does that mean, you know? But that's a difficult conversation, and so we make assumptions, particularly in the academy, you know, that people know. And I'm finding that the people who are supposed to know don't know, right? You know, and a lot of times they do that even with the students. And I'm saying, particularly in the environment that we're in, I'm saying it's like these students are in a better position to know some things that you don't know, but they're not going to say it because, you know, they're intimidated in this process. But when you move, you get out and you hear them speak, and you say, damn, that was a deep analysis that you came up with. I mean, using different language, but, you know, so it's trying to get them to understand that they have to get them out of that class position, you know, that they hold. And I don't know the answers, but I just know that we have to keep engaging and having rigorous conversation where we challenge people, but we find ways to collaborate together to get things done. And I think there are some faculty on my campus who I've been able to do that with, where I've had to have some rough conversation with and said, well, come on, let's work on this. Let's do that, you know, but we need more of it.
I would say that with adjunct faculty, it's so difficult. And the people with privilege rise to the top because they have the time, right? So we often have to slow down what we're doing, right? How to get a bargaining team that is, you know, diverse, representative of everybody who we're representing, right? And not just the older retired white men who are available because they don't have kids at home, or they don't have a big commute, or they're not going to teach, or, you know, teach yoga or bartend, right? So that is a big challenge for us. So it makes it's more work, right? To facilitate, to create a structure that enables all voices to be represented.
That's a great question. I think one of the particular evils of the neoliberal period is that it's parceled out all the varieties of difference into separate interests that are irreducible to raising the living standards and creating a dignified life for all working class people. And one of the manifestations of this I've seen in university organizing, and I'll admit that I haven't been able to figure out this question in practice, let alone theory, is there seems to be a big chasm between these very righteous issues that are coming up around underrepresented people on faculty, around the distribution of grad student funding, around things like microaggressions, and the broader economic situation facing adjuncts and students. Now, in a way, it's a symptom of our period that there's so many bad things to be outraged about that it's almost impossible to decide a point of emphasis. But I will plead guilty to just pure failure in terms of being able to conceptually connect the issues that are most animating many of my classmates who are furious that most of the professors that they see are white when most of the students are not. They're furious that they see white students advancing where students of color are not. And they have all of this energy, and you see this around the struggles at Missouri State, I think especially, but across the country. But there's just this chasm separating that from a broader program of combating austerity in the university. And I can't figure it out. I mean, thankfully, it's not up to me. If it were, we'd all be in trouble. But I think that we need to just explore the possibility for affinities across these struggles. And it seems like a good start is to conceptualize how this is all a product of austerity, and attacks on the lowest tiers of the academic labor market and attacks on the most vulnerable people in that market need to be conceptualized as one and the same. And so that puts basically the adjunct struggle and the struggle of underrepresented people on par.
So I just want to add one thing, because it's sort of practical. So one of the things that happened at New Paltz is that it's so interesting, because when I got there, I started in '99, it was like a big wave of hiring. So for the next 15 years, I mean, it was, we call it the gravy train years. We hired, I mean, I was chair of my department, and I hired, I think, 10 people in the course of 7 years, right? And so there was this moment where, you know, wow, it was amazing, and then it crashed. So the faculty started to get bifurcated again, right? So, because when I got there, there was all these crusty old people who never did research, who you never saw, didn't do a thing. They weren't making that much money, because none of them ever got raises, because they didn't really do very much. But all of a sudden, it was like, where are all these new young people? We need to keep hiring. And as that started to happen, there was a group of people also that were like, look, we have to stop hiring white women, we have to stop hiring white men. I'm a white woman, I'm a sociologist, I don't want any more white women in my department. You know, we have enough. We need to hire people of color, we need to hire people with disabilities, we need to hire people who are genderqueer, whatever. And so, you know, we started doing that, a couple other departments, and the discourse around that, you know, we just never shut up about it. And as a result, I think we're still woeful. I mean, it's pathetic how white our faculty is. I mean, you know, let's be honest. But we do have a pretty good core now of young faculty of color, who some of whom are tenured and some of whom aren't. And they're all really activists, and they're not going to sit around, and they're not afraid that if they speak up, they're going to not get tenure, because there's no evidence for that at New Paltz. It's really not easy to get tenure. You have to publish there. It's not a research one, but really, the percentages of people who get tenured is really good, and it's never about that. It's always about something else, right? So they started getting really involved, and they were frustrated with the union, and were like, okay, you guys, run for delegate, run for... So they're now in UUP, still frustrated, but they're also involved in RUP, and as a result, it isn't us telling them. And also, you know, as a sociologist, part of the kind of work that I do and that what I teach about is that I'm not the expert to come into your community and tell you what you need. You know, you need to let the community say if they want you there, and then if they do, what do they want, what do they need? That sort of more, you know, bottom-up approach. And that's sort of how we approached RUP, and it's been amazing because a lot of young people are really involved in it. And also, you know, I am a senior faculty member, and so are some of my friends that are in it, but we're always like, what do you need? What do you need from us? How can we help you? How can we be supportive? You know, what are the ways that you could tell us? Because I compared to what they make here, I'm sure I'm making a lot less, right? Because I'm at a rinky-dink liberal arts school. But compared to them, oh my God, you know, because I got that DSI on the base every year. I got a raise for 19 years in a row on my base salary. I started really low, but now I make a good living. And so, of course, I could always use more, and I feel like I'm exploited by the university but they're struggling to survive, and also their generation has student loans in a way that mine doesn't. I'm 58, so when I went to SUNY Albany, it was $1,200 a year, and I don't have loans from that. And then when I went to grad school, I got assistantships, and I could afford to live on $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000 because I had roommates. But you know, you're a student. You shouldn't have to do that when you're an adult and you're a college professor, right? And so for them, it really is more of a struggle. And I think the reason that this group is working is because the senior faculty who are involved get it and are listening and are having them set the agenda. And I do think, and that's really important, and every chance we get, we say to the administration, hire more faculty of color, hire more faculty of color. We just had a meeting the other day, and I said, you know, you keep talking about this. We hired a criminologist several years ago. There were 2 candidates that were amazing. We hired one. We wanted to hire the second one and do it as a cluster hire. One was an African-American man. The other one was a Puerto Rican woman. And the president wouldn't do it. He made us pick one, right? And it's like, here's a perfect way for you to put your money where your mouth is. And we were down several professors, and we have a lot of majors, but they wouldn't do it. So they're constant. The trick is to keep pushing it back in their face also, that, okay, you know, you're the diversity president, but like, what's happening here? We need more people of color. And the students are also pushing for that. So I think again, I think you're right. We all, and me too, once in a while I'll say something and I'll be like, oh my God, that's like, I can't believe that came out of my mouth. And I teach about hegemonic white feminism, and I do, you know, whatever, transnational feminisms in my work. I'm really careful about that, but it doesn't matter. This is sort of the culture that we live in, and we have to constantly reflect, and we need people to call us out when we do that stuff.
Maybe we want to open it up now.
Yeah.
Okay. So at this point, I'm wondering if perhaps people in the audience have questions or comments, and we'll just go ahead and open up the conversation.
Thank you. Very interesting work going on. I'm Mike Zweig. I'm here at Stony Brook. I've retired, but I'm still active in life and what we're trying to do here. I want to throw a couple things into the mix as possibilities. Here at Stony Brook, we're really trying to get academics involved in UUP. It's very hard to do. And one of the reasons is that it is not valued by the administration at all in the way of service when you're trying to go up for tenure. What counts as legitimate participation in the university community? So Nancy just stepped away, but I think, oh, there she is. We're trying to work between the union and the Senate, which sets in one way or another what are professional obligations. The union contract doesn't do that. So we're trying to get the university administration to say, you know, UUP is a valuable contribution to the community here. And so anybody who wants to work in UUP, just as in the Senate or anywhere else in the university service environment, that's a legitimate thing. And I'm just wondering, for one of my wonderments, how you all might think about that, or what your experience is on your campuses about how unions are seen and what problem. The second thing I want to raise is as a way of organizing that's not unions, where you don't need to have a union to be collectively engaged and put pressure on. So one of the things that we've been doing in UUP over the past years and in AFT is thinking about, and 20 years ago we actually organized around it and got it, a fair labor standards practice code of conduct for universities, for higher education, fair labor standards code of conduct, which lays out, wages and for adjuncts. It lays out about diversity and a whole range of things, free inquiry, and so on. And to take that as a campaign to our administrations to sign up to this code of conduct. That yes, we as a university administration recognize that these are legitimate things, and we're going to do it. It's not collective bargaining, but it's setting certain standards that the university agrees that it's going to uphold. And that becomes a campaign on the campus with the students, with the faculty, with the community, what kind of an institution is it? And that can draw on the kinds of questions that were raised in this morning's panel as to what is higher education and what are the standards of practice. And those two things are going on, and I'm particularly on the last thing wondering how SEIU and other unions, UAW and other unions that are in higher ed could work together with us in AFT to actually construct such a thing, and then we would go out unified as all the unions working together in higher education, because there's very little cooperation among us. And that might be a way of doing that, and I'm interested to know how you all feel about that.
I think that's a great idea. I touched on this a little bit. What you're talking about reminds me of the Just Employment campaign that they had at Georgetown. So I mentioned that Georgetown is the only campus in the country where the administration actually has a just employment policy that they actually follow. And it came out of, although strictly speaking, it doesn't quite apply to the adjunct faculty paid by the course. but that's a whole other story. Nevertheless, they have, so there's have you heard of the Kalmanovitz Initiative for the Working Poor, right? So they have, so this is a great thing to coordinate on, right? Because we got one of their staff came over to us at George Washington University. We have a coalition going of some of the unions, the undergraduates, the grad students, the full-time contingent and tenured faculty to talk about exactly that, a sort of a you call it fair labor standards or a just employment policy. And the students just introduced these measures, and it's, you know, setting standards, living wages, benefits, respecting collective bargaining. I don't know if they put this in there, but from our point of view, for the adjunct faculty, it would be pay parity and job parity, right? But I can tell you that what it needs to succeed is massive mobilization. So it's a great organizing tool, but you have to organize around it because these institutions don't care what their standards are, right? They don't care, and they're not going to give it to you just because it's the right thing to do, right? No, I know you do. I know, yeah. And one of the challenges we've had is that many of our members believe that because it's the right thing to do, if we just educate the administrations well enough, then they'll do it. They won't, right? So the history of the Just Employment Project, you can look it up. There's a video from Democracy Now! Back in 2004 or 5. They interviewed one of the students. The undergraduate students at Georgetown University went on hunger strike for a week to get the Jesuit administration, Jesuits who enshrined in their kind of social justice policy, they weren't paying any attention to their social justice policy until the students went on strike. And they got the university to agree to it was like a workers' bill of rights or something like this, you know, which included a bunch of stuff, the no sweatshops, et cetera, and that became their just employment policy, which then some of the insiders in Georgetown really pushed them. But the key to that whole campaign was the undergraduates' willingness to be so activist and mobilize. And I think that's something that I always come back to when we talk about doing these things, which I think we should, is that it takes huge amount of mobilization. And I think, I always tell our members too, you have to find I think in every institution there's a sort of a point at which, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this publicly, there is a point that the administration don't want you to go there, right? And if you're in bargaining and they're sensitive on something, we'd be like, okay, and we go away. So did you hear what they just said? That's their, the opposite of their sweet spot, right? Their vulnerable point, and then you have to find that. So with the Achilles heel, right? At Georgetown, it was the student hunger strike, and I would love to coordinate this on campuses across the country, bringing all the unions together, and showing, but engaging all the community members in mobilization, because that's what it takes.
So I have an answer to your first part of your question. So this idea of service, very important. And we did this at New Paltz, and it was a huge fight. And we kept saying to the president, why is this a big fight? It's service. I'm an activist. The stuff that I do with the Immigrant Defense Network, you count that as service. Why is it not service? It's not service to me. It's not about how much money I make. It's service to the faculty. It's to make their working conditions better so they can be better professors. And he said yes, and we announced it in our fabulous award-winning newsletter, The Bullhorn. And then somehow it wasn't true anymore a year later. So then we went back, and in labor management, we had all the old notes, we had all the old stuff, and it was like, dude, you need to make a commitment. And it was really important because that's why we have a really great group of young people who, some of you know, Kirsten and Steve Pampanella and of course Beth, that they're getting service credit for it, so that, you know, they've created conditions that the president then could show how progressive he is. So we now have 2 places on campus where women who breastfeed can go and pump their milk, right? That doesn't cost him anything, but oh boy, he keeps bringing it up, even though Kirsten fought for 2 years for that, right? And so it speaks to something you said, and that is you need to know how to manipulate the people that you work with, right? So I was at a Jesuit school too. Oh, the social justice mission. I used that to manipulate them constantly to get what I needed. And I think it's the same. You have to read who it is that you're working with, figure out what they want to promote about themselves and what's their vulnerable point. And you have to be, clever about it. You can't be like, oh yeah, let's exploit them or manipulate them. But in some ways you have to do that. Otherwise, they're just obstructionists constantly. But the service thing really matters. And once we announced that it counted as service, way more people stepped up and got involved. And that really has had a big difference.
Yeah, I think that we need both an inside and outside game. But I think the outside game is going to push the inside game because I think the people inside are very comfortable. And if there's no tension, there's not going to be any change. And that you have to keep agitating to sort of keep people accountable to be able to do. But if you don't have that ability, then it's business as usual. And there are good people there. I don't know if any of you know who Robert F. Williams is. And Robert F. Williams, was in North Carolina, and he was forced out and went to Cuba and China and so forth. And Rob had learned from the Chinese. He said that through the Chinese he learned that there's three types of people. There are people who go all the way with you, the people who are halfway, and people who are on the fence. You don't want to push them over. So you got to know where people are. And so there are people who are inside. Some of them are good people, but unless, there's, first of all, the relational, practice, and there's some issues, and there's some motion that's pushing them, they'll shift, towards, trying to be more supportive. So I think we have to figure that out, but I think it's going to come from, more around the outside. And so that means is that we have to organize, we have to be consistent and vigilant, in terms of dealing with it, because that's where the change is going to come. If that doesn't exist, it's good. It's good. In fact, there's effort to pacify, that. I said, oh yes, that's a wonderful book. Here's a couple of more dollars for you, and go get lost somewhere. Don't versus you raising some challenging things that benefits everybody. But still, I mean, it's just like, for example, I think it was the governor in Georgia said that if these folks come out and vote, we're going to be in trouble, right? You work, that's your idea, So it's like, what? That's what you want, right? So.
I'd really like to build off. This is a great discussion. Our union is massive. 27,000 members of the bargaining unit. And the number of those who participate in the day-to-day functions of the union is abysmal. I mean, the union itself is run by 4 people. I'm not exact. Actually, that might be a generous assessment. 4 people, 3 of whom are beholden to one. And so the amount of participation is very low. Yeah, the community. No, CUNY, the Professional Staff Congress, 27,000. 27,000. If we had 27,000 people in our group, that would be a different story. So the big question is why aren't people interested? When I try to bring my colleagues to union meetings, they say they roll their eyes and smile and say, It actually reminds me of a story of this guy who gets a job as a taxi driver and says. They say, oh, you're in a union, here's the card. And he says, where are the meetings? And they say, what are you, a communist? And that is very much the way it goes right now. You go if you have some kind of political interest in it. So the question for an organizer is, what is it going to take to get people interested? Now, scanning the national scene, and for some reason we haven't talked about this at all today, especially in the first panel, there is a national movement of rank-and-file-led strikes and direct actions by public school teachers, many of whom are in right-to-work states. So if we're facing the austerity blues, I would call public sector strikes, the austerity antidepressant. And this is certainly an issue that has galvanized people who do not consider themselves activists. I have had the privilege of seeing a number of panels featuring participants in the West Virginia teacher strike. They're the great heroes of our moment, and by their own account, it was only until very recently that they considered themselves activists, political actors, leftists, and so forth. And some of that might be, shucks, but that certainly is true of the majority of those people who took very serious risks to go on strike in right-to-work states. And so the wager of the 7K or strike campaign at CUNY is that people don't abstain from participation in the political life of their union because they don't care about their own standard of living. That's ridiculous. And if you believe that, sure, what we need is a top-down business union. But I don't believe that. I don't believe that about my colleagues and my fellow human beings. I think that our wager is that people stay out of union politics because they don't see the point. And it's a way, you go to these meetings and they're just, it's a pep rally for a football team that hasn't won a game in 20 years. You know, and oh, stand up and be acknowledged. There's victory speech after victory speech. When was the last time we won anything? And smart critical people don't have time for this. And you go to the demos, and I go to the demos because I'm a communist. But if like an ordinary person goes to the demos, here, stand there, hold this really vague sign that doesn't really mean anything, chant this really vague thing that could mean anything, and then go home when we tell you to go home. That's politics. Come on. So based on our observations of the red wave, these radical rank and file teacher strikes, we've been operating under the assumption that if ordinary rank and file members of our union have the opportunity to improve their conditions of living and their conditions of labor by taking direct action, you bet they're going to take it. And so what we've been doing is we've been going one by one to these really desiccated life support chapters on the different campuses. There's I think 24 CUNY chapters of the PSC that have meetings. Now these meetings are largely perfunctory informational events, right? The chapter chair gets a course release. They're required to have 2 meetings per semester, and maybe they do that. A lot of folks email their chapter chair, when's the meeting, and they never hear back from them. And this is for a reason. This is by design. So we have been going and we've been linking up with like this dispersed group of hardcore activists throughout the system, and we've been trying to bring democracy to these chapter meetings by putting forward resolutions that state a commitment to strike if 7K is not won at the bargaining table. Now, you would think that it wouldn't be controversial for a union to say that they're willing to strike if their primary demand isn't met. Now, oh, it's illegal. Oh, striking is illegal, and that's what adds the hot sauce. That's the interesting part, actually. And I'm sorry to take this over. I'll shut up in a minute. But so 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, our union leadership ran a strike authorization campaign. Now, if you were paying attention, it was very clear that there was never going to be a strike. There was no mobilization. There was no strike fund. There was no organizing for an actual strike. But they ran a strike authorization campaign as a part of their bargaining with CUNY, and 92% people came out and they voted yes. And so there's certainly precedent. And so what we've found in these chapter meetings, we have to fight our way through the front door. One of the chapter chairs, this is my favorite, he said it's macho to pass resolutions where people have to vote yes or no. And this is kind of this co-optation of very righteous political causes. So once we actually are able to get these resolutions onto the floor, they're wildly popular. And not just among adjuncts. We have a lot of full-time faculty who sound like some of the comrades today, who say, listen, I'm not a millionaire, but yeah, I have it pretty good compared to some of y'all, and maybe it's time to share the wealth a little bit, And so we have found that once we open up a little bit of oxygen and a little bit of space, all of these people who our union leadership has been telling us are apathetic or hostile to the adjunct struggles are actually coming forward and saying, no, I support you. And actually the most heartening thing that we've seen is we've been able to link up with student groups who are fighting racism on campus, and are fighting for student issues. And they have come through big time, supporting 7K strike. They see the adjunct struggle as part of their own struggle in a way that I wish some of these full-time, socialist professors or whatever would be able to conceptualize. But I've thrown enough elbows today, so I can wrap. Yeah.
I want to say one thing on the way there, which is that thank you for this issue of this framework of apathy. I frankly think we need to just get rid of the word apathy. I hear it applied, our members don't care, it's bullshit. Everybody cares about their working conditions, and most faculty I know care about their students. I hear the same argument about my students, and I don't abide talking shit about my students. This idea, students don't care about their education, they're just apathetic, they're just on Instagram, they're just on Facebook, they don't care, they're not paying attention. That's not my students. So I don't think we should use the word apathetic. I'll use the word disempowered, I'll use the word disenfranchised, I'll use the word, why have they lost their voice, why do they have no sense that they can influence things. So thank you for highlighting that. If you give people an opportunity, a sense of hope and possibility, then they show up. It's that people feel like there is no hope. And I've gone to my union chapter meetings, and I go as a duty. And it's like being at a horrible family reunion and watching people fight about stuff from 1984, and it's embarrassing. Why would I even go, right? But you give people an opportunity to fight, and you give them some hope, and then they show up. And I think that the West Virginia strikes are an example of that, and my students inspire me on that too. My students, you open up that conversation with students about inequality, and they are on fire like that. And so I think we should just completely get rid of this idea that anybody's apathetic about their struggles.
Got me excited, I'm sorry. And my area is leadership and change, but what you're talking about is how do we create transformation? And so we need leadership who's adept at, trying to inspire and encourage people, and also understanding that leadership is not them always taking up space, but leadership is backing up and bringing in people, new voice and space for them to deal with it, whether it's in the classroom or it's other places, right? So it's like, how do we help people get unstuck? How do we get unstuck? But we have to be able to have some type of reflection analysis, and we need that kind of leadership. So it's like we need a change in leadership, or do we need a change in people's ideas about leadership and what that means? So we have to change the paradigm, and I think that's what we're talking about a little bit. I'm sorry about that.
Just kind of a follow-up on all that, because I think that whole thing about participation and democracy, democratizing unions, bringing the oxygen back in, I think that's kind of where we are too here at Stony Brook. And it's all, we haven't even talked about this, but that Janus decision, it really does turn us into a right-to-work state, at least our public institutions all around the Northeast. And so we're faced with a situation where if the unions don't find a way to do this, they're in decline. That's where I think the teacher strikes are such an inspiration, because they've really gotten it together within a right-to-work context. So we need to look closely at their tactics. My question is, you were talking a little bit, Jarrod, about one way to do that, to bring people in, I don't think it's about leaders. It's also about tactics. What are the practical steps that, say, people in an institution where a union is perceived as being closed and undemocratic and that kind of thing. What can we do? What are the concrete steps? I mean, you talked about having these referenda. I wanted to hear from some others of you about how you democratize a union. What have you seen that actually works in recent times to do that?
So I have to tell a short story to tell you what we did, right? So the president of our union, because of what's happening in our department, we went to a union meeting. And it says that, any member could come and, be on the agenda and so forth. They would not let us say anything. I mean, and basically got an attitude and we left, pushing chairs and everything, and everything. So then I had to challenge some of the leadership around them speaking on social media about our department. So then we had a forum on how to deal with the federal and state budget around public education. And so one of the professors that called the president of the union, she called him and said, if Tony Vandermeer, the president of my union, is on that forum, we're not going to have it. So she was censoring me. President of my union, and the academic union is censoring our voice. So anyway, I wrote a letter, and galvanized folks and so forth. So what has happened in the backdrop is that we created the CDU. So we create a new body of interested people to go to the union meetings and put resolutions on the floor and to debate those resolutions in the union, to debate those unions. So we passed it. So we had the annual meeting. We said, well, we want to postpone this to the next meeting because we wanted to get some of the money for adjuncts to be grievance officers and paid, right? So we structured it, we met, we got it, boom, we got that in. And now we got to select. So it's like now we have to, create a network outside of it. Well, that's a government exile almost, to begin to deal and to push that. So I think that's a part of, what we have to do. Now the other part is this: is that the Montgomery bus boycott, right? That people were not able to vote, but yet they were very, very active. We haven't seen that level of activity, since. So whether we have a structural union or not, it is a question, but it's not necessarily a question. The question is, who's ready to be engaged to push the question? And we have to find alternative ways, when other ways are exhausted. Listen, when they really come down and start to become real fascists, what we going to do? That we going to stop? Or we going to have to be more intense? So I'm saying is that we have to figure it out on our campus, but part of that is how do we give up some of that privilege that we have, from, our nice little salaries, whatever it is, and so forth, and says, okay, I need to put this extra time in. I need to cultivate newer, and young leadership. I need to pass on these notes for them to do. That's some of the work that many of us who've been here have to do and start pushing. And let people make those mistakes. Let them get seasoned and fall and tumble and so forth. But we have to do more of that. And I see that, at UMass, and I see it other places. But now the question is, how do we try to consolidate? How do we network so we're learning from various people's experiences, and then we can keep trying and innovating and doing new things to find solutions? This is, for me, this is the value of this, is that learning from other people's successes and mistakes, as well as them learning from ours and so forth.
I have a question for everybody. So this is a conversation we're having with I called it a breakaway union, but then they were like, we're not really breaking away, don't call it that. I'm thinking, I have two ideas. One is I think that all New York State union teachers, students need to stop organizing around tuition increases and instead organize to force the state to give us more money. So it used to be 70%, now it's 30. We need to get them back up to 50, 60, or 70, and that needs to be one thing. But my question is, for me, I would love to, because the people in RUP, they're incredible activists, and some of them were public school teachers, and they come out of labor activism as teachers, other kinds of activism. I want Kirsten to run for president. I want Steve Pampanella to run for her vice president. I want Brian Oback to go back, and But I'm afraid because the union, UUP, is hamstrung to a certain degree in what they can do. And so I don't know, is it better for us to keep it as a separate thing? Because right now all we're doing is having meetings, and we have enough meetings. So what exactly are we accomplishing now? We did a lot up until now, so, and we're working on campaigns, but so is it better for the people that are involved in RUP to just sort of unilaterally get them elected into the union, or is that going to then destroy the momentum? I don't know.
Thank you. I've been here for a really long time, and I've been involved, faculty senate. I'm Terry Tizo. I'm now in the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, but I've been on campus for 37 years, and I've been through many different places, done a lot of things. My point is that, and I've been to the union over the years for different, and I always would advise young people, okay, go do this, go do that. I've known the people, I know they're good people, and I got to the point where I'm like, they don't do anything for us. And I don't mean this against anybody individually, but when there's 64 campuses in this state and we can't get anything done, I go crazy. I don't understand that. How many people do we represent? And if we can't meet with people and say, look, we need this, this, and this is where we're going to stop. And I don't know why we can't do that. With 64 campuses, that's a lot of campuses, a lot of people. I mean, public schools, local public schools get more done. Suffolk County gets more done. And I have friends in those, and they can't believe how we are. They say it to me all the time. How can they not be stopping that? How can they be not? And it's like, I said, I don't know.
And then you go to one of their meetings and you understand.
I've been on a SUNY-wide committee. I've been to the state. They've had them here. I've been to them. I know the people. You know, and so my answer to you is either let's make that change at the SUNY-wide level, see what happens. And if it doesn't, then go. But I'm sorry, I'm really tired of listening to what goes on at that level, and I read everything, and I follow. Who is that? Okay. Yep, yep. Exactly. I agree. Exactly, and well, I'm not going to say, I guess I will say, I think we're in bed with them. I mean, I've seen it for so long, and once again, I'm not pointing fingers at individuals. I know there's really lots of good people that work really hard to make things happen, but after a while, I just stopped, and I just, I'll work with with our own Senate here, but I am so excited that some of our younger people are getting involved. I'm like psyched, yes. So maybe, what you're saying, the way you came in and said, this is what we do, and I'm like, oh my God, yes, Hopefully that'll make a change, Why not? I don't understand why it can't. I don't know, so that's me. There you go.
Well, it's just a struggle. One of the things that was done maybe 15 years ago, there was a survey done of union members, not just in UUP, but nationwide union members. And the question was asked in this survey, have you ever been involved in organizing a union? And the answer, actually being involved in an organizing campaign that would bring a union to a workplace where you were working where there wasn't a union, right? Not working on a contract campaign, but have you ever been involved in organizing a union? Less than 5% of union members have ever been involved in organizing a union, because when they come to their place of employment, there already is a union, it's just there, and they don't have any idea what the union is, what the union does, what it is that the union has made in their working conditions that wouldn't be there if there hadn't been a union. So that's a problem. It's a structural problem. As far as SUNY is concerned, there are 64 campuses in SUNY, but only 29 are in UUP, because the rest of them are community colleges. And those are county-based contracts, and each community college has its own union. So just structurally, that's how it goes. We here at Stony Brook, just as in campuses everywhere, that generational handover. How do you get newer people engaged Well, one thing is to actually open the door and say, hey, come on in and help. So we have some young people on this campus who are trying to do that, and I'm working with them and not telling them what to do, but listening and engaging and thinking about it with them. And I think the rest of us who are faculty who are here need to do that and find out how we can help. But it's their union to make. It's not our union to hold on to. And I think that that is a very important point of departure for us, in that nonetheless we have something to do. We can actually make a difference. And that difference is not going to be by saying, oh, the union is just a bunch of shit, because what has it ever done? That's not going to get, that's just not helpful, and it isn't even true, all right? Because in fact, UUP has made tremendous contributions to the life and the academic and the financial life of us as faculty members and as staff. So I think that we need to hold on to that. And that brings me back to this thing about, is UUP valued? Something that we can do here at Stony Brook is to try to get the administration to say uncle on that question, and then really mean it and have it be part of the university's, the president's message to the university, and all kinds of other indicators of that, so that younger faculty can come up and say to their supervisors, no, this is university business. This is university legitimate stuff.
So I have a question. Do you have, at New Paltz, our big rival is SUNY Geneseo, right? So whenever we want something, we say, at SUNY Geneseo they have this, at SUNY Geneseo they have this. And so I don't think it's going to impress your president to say at SUNY-New Paltz it counts as service, but you have? But you need to formalize it, I guess, is what's going on. Right. Oh, okay. But my question is, if you could say, well, SUNY Albany, SUNY Buffalo, SUNY Binghamton, right? Yeah. The other thing I wanted to add is, and this sort of goes back to what you were saying, you have to get the students on board, right? The hunger strike at Georgetown, you know, they don't care about us, the administration, but they do care about the students and the parents. And one of the things that we did with RUP was we got all of this data that talked about, you know, because the salaries at New Paltz are a lot lower than at our sister whatever colleges, and there's this idea that somehow we live in the middle of nowhere and it's really cheap to live, but the Hudson Valley costs a fortune. It's very artisanal, and all those Brooklynites have moved up and jacked up the housing. So it's not cheap to live, and so we keep trying to get this residential thing in the contract, and our president presumably is fighting it. We never get it. So we're systematically paid a lot less than some of the other four-year colleges when you know, control for a region and all that other stuff. And so we got all this data, and we made these very simple, kind of like the slides up there, simple things about, you know, this percentage less and this percentage less, and this is how many faculty are men, and this is how many faculty are women, and this is how many faculty are, and then, you know, African American, Latinx, whatever. And then the students tell their parents. And then when we were organizing, we had a lot of protests in the spring. We made sure the media came. And, you know, this is one great thing about the young people. I don't have a Twitter account. I would rather go for a hike. But, you know, or not stare at a frickin' computer my whole life, or a phone. But they are all on that stuff. And so we did that. We did Facebook. We linked up with some of those teachers that were striking across the country. And we presented this information, and then a bunch of us wrote letters to the editor, and in each one, you don't want to overwhelm people, so my letter might be all about the bad salary. Somebody else's letter might be all about 70% of faculty or adjuncts and why that hurts your kids. And we just inundated the media, and I think that it made people sympathetic to us, because people think we have, you know, the other day my mechanic dropped me off at school because my car was breaking down and he needed to listen to it, and he's like, God, this campus has so much money. And I looked at him and I said, really, have you been inside? It looks like someone threw up on the carpet in my classroom 20 years ago. But they keep building these new buildings, and it's like, look, that's a separate budget. We don't want these new buildings either. We would like to see the money, you know, used in other ways, but the community around thinks that it's rich because there's another building going up. And so unless we educate them, they don't have any sympathy either.
Chris said about being strategic, I think, and so I think that we also have to figure out in terms of how do we relate these issues to the community and to the students who have state representatives, state senators, and so that they are bringing that process and that that's coming from the community to be able to put in the budget for the universities for their needs. And sometimes I don't think we make that connection. And I know for us in Boston, it's like, look, so, I'd work with another person when they do the reapportionment for redistricting, and we went in Massachusetts to all the various places to talk because we were trying to create a minority district, from the Boston area with people of color. So we didn't get what we want, but we got very close, which is what Ayanna Pressley did and ran, and she just won, right? So now we're gonna, we want to invite Ayanna Pressley because the election is what, the 6th or something. Is that after the 6th, we want her to come to campus and says, Ayanna, congratulations, listen, this is what we need in Congress, or whatever, but she knows is that she's got to be accountable or she's not going to be there for long. So, we have to begin to deal with the needs of the community, and a lot of times we get caught in our own minutiae that we like, all right, we forget, strategically, where's the real pressure points? And I think that's what we have to begin to work with.
But just one question here at the end, which is, we only took, I think, one question from the audience, and I see people who could be students. Since we're talking about students, are there anybody else in the room who feels like asking a question before we wrap up? Are y'all students too back here? I was just saying that we only took really one question from the audience, and we keep talking about students. I was like, we got some students right here in the room, so just before we wrap up, do any of the students have a question? You don't have to. I'm just creating an opportunity. Yeah? Yeah.
So after listening to what a lot of you had to say, I think that you almost maybe underestimate how much students care about their campuses. So I think that if you tell the students what's going on and you really let this out, I mean, even looking here, if there were more students, I think they would really care. I have a story. One of my friend's professors told her students that she wasn't getting paid for one of the classes she was running because there were very few students in the class. So they didn't pay her for it, but she wanted to do it. And like even this year she's in a different class and the teacher she knows does get paid for that class, and we were all excited about that just from hearing about her. The students really care, and if you tell us, I think that we could be a part of a movement that can help. And I just was wondering if there was any thoughts about something like that, something where you get the students more involved in kind of the organization.
How would you do that? I mean, what would be first steps to do that? I guess just move forward.
Right. Yeah, but the dean wants us to know we have I forget what we call the committee. Said we want students on the committee. We really push students on every committee, but they push back. We said we want students on the committee to get them involved because it was the students who rallied, to support some of what was going on. So but I think sometimes. Even in CIT, which is the Center for Innovative Teaching, one of the faculty was saying, well, we don't want, students to see this process and see that we are vulnerable. I said, that's when they really learn, when they see how vulnerable we are. So we got to learn to really engage them more in the process and kind of get out of the kind of elitist and snobbery, perspective that we have around academia, but see that there has to be a more respectful and reciprocal relationship between student and teacher.
plus the students have parents, right? Mobilized into this process as well. And I think that those are all kinds of things that the union needs to bring back and try to figure out how to do.
I agree, and I would also add that there's a list of student organizations on your campus. I would go through and see what are the progressive organizations. I know at New Paltz, NYPIRG, I'm sure you have a NYPIRG here, right? The guy that runs it is amazing, and they do environmental stuff, but they also do a whole stuff on educational inequality, and they are that NYPIRG around the state is one of the reasons there was a tuition freeze when there was. I would find out every school has a different name, right? What's the Black Student Union? Is there a feminist group? Is there, find out what all these different groups are, and then reach out to them and talk about not just what we want, because we need better contracts, we need better job security, the adjuncts, and also nobody's mentioned lecturers. Lecturers at New Paltz teach 5 classes a semester and they make $45,000 a year. These are people with PhDs also who are trying to get full-time tenure-track jobs, so it's kind of hard to publish when you teach 5 classes a semester and you have 130 students, right? And so we need, but students, maybe they do care about that, but they care more about how expensive their tuition is. But this is all part of the same structure, right? And so if we can find those common connections, then I think you can get the students on this campus to definitely get involved.
Yeah, I teach, I have the luxury of teaching sociology, and so we talk about this explicitly with my students, and I have found it really helpful to actually ground, like I teach race, class, and gender, and I ground that conversation in college, like kind of drawing on Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is that you ground the conversation in the conditions of our lives. And so it's been a really beautiful two-way street where I tell the students and talk to them about the university and how it runs and like why your professors never answer your emails and why we never grade your papers and why you can never find us, right? So that they have some understanding of like, well, what's shaping your university experience? But then it also becomes a two-way street where then I get to hear all about my students' experiences. Like I had no idea about the registrar's office. Oh my God, what the hell is going on over there, right? And they hate, if you want to start a student revolution, take up parking and and take up the cafeteria and the food on campus. Like that's what I have learned. There were ticks in the mashed potatoes, right? And so it's been like a two-way street. And so that that helping students understand the conditions of their own lives as students, helping them to understand the condition of faculty members, and then it helps me as a faculty member understand the lives of my students. And I find that what we build in that conversation is a mutual understanding that in some ways our struggles are connected. I mean, as the K through 12 teachers say, our working conditions are your learning conditions, right? And so the struggles my students bring into the room, I can better understand like why they're struggling. And so I think you're right about the way we can really build a sense of solidarity between students and professors. I mean, I do think we have to be mindful, and I always try to be mindful of this, is that I also have a power-laden relationship with my students. Like I have your grade right here in my hands, and I have to be careful about not imposing any of my political agendas or undermining student autonomy. But I think that we can begin to build some of our relationships so that we can see the points of connection between our struggles. Any last questions from anybody else? Well, thank you to the panelists for sharing all of these points of struggle and connection and learning from each other. And thank you for those who came. And thank you to Chris and the center for organizing this venue. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks to Michelle, too, for moderating. And helping the work. All right. Yeah, I think so. I mean,